He was not kicked out of the house. He was erased from the table of his own family. The sentence fell into the kitchen like a thin blade, quiet, but cutting deep. Vanessa said it as lightly as someone commenting on the weather. This Sunday the whole family would have lunch together, she said, but he would not be sitting at the same table. Ethan Cole froze in the middle of the kitchen, both hands still gripping the grocery bag he had just brought home. The thin paper handles dug into his skin, the pain sharp and real, while his mind went strangely blank. The smell of rotisserie chicken, still warm inside the box, drifted through the air, familiar and intimate, just like all the ordinary evenings they had shared. His heart slammed once hard, as if it had struck an invisible wall. He waited. He waited for a laugh, for an awkward joke, for any sign that this was just careless wording. But Vanessa did not laugh. She opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of sparkling water, twisted the cap with practiced ease, indifferent, as if she had just reminded him to take out the trash. In that moment, something inside Ethan shifted quietly, but permanently. Not long before he had walked into the house feeling unusually light. The end of quarter meetings had dragged on, traffic had crawled, but none of it weighed on him the way it used to. Years of marriage created a strange kind of comfort, knowing where the light switch was without looking, knowing the sounds the house made when night settled in. On the way home, he had stopped at the market and bought a small apple pie. Marjorie liked apple pie. His mother-in-law used to say the smell reminded her of Sundays when she was young. Ethan did not buy it out of obligation. He bought it because he had grown used to being the one who kept the peace, the one who smoothed over cracks before anyone else noticed them. Vanessa had been in the living room when he arrived, eyes on her phone, the television on, but muted. A thick, watchful silence hung in the house. He said he was home. She glanced up, smiled only with her mouth, then looked back down. Ethan set the groceries on the counter and began putting things away. When his hand reached the carton of milk, he felt that familiar pressure in the air, the feeling of walking into a room where an argument had just ended, even if no voices were raised. He asked if she was okay. Vanessa said she was fine without looking at him. Ethan did not push. He had learned that when she went quiet like this, questions only made things worse. He thought about taking a shower, eating dinner, going to sleep. Sunday would come soon enough. Sundays were always the same family lunch at her mother's house, everyone smiling while silently keeping score. He had just lifted the milk when Vanessa spoke again. Oh, about Sunday. Ethan turned the carton still suspended in his hand. For a brief second, he felt relief. Routine. Familiar ground. She said the whole family would be there. He nodded. Then she added calmly that he would not be sitting at the same table. The milk never made it into the refrigerator. Ethan could not move. He asked what she meant, startled by how thin his own voice sounded. Vanessa took a sip of water and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, an ordinary gesture that would have meant nothing on any other day. "It is my mother's day," she said. "It is special. I do not want attention." "Tension," Ethan repeated. The word tasted absurd in his mouth. "What tension am I causing?" Vanessa sighed, already irritated. "You know how you are," she said. "You notice things. You ask questions. You make faces." Ethan's stomach twisted, not metaphorically, but physically, as if something had grabbed and pulled. He thought of all the times he had swallowed his words at that table. The jokes about his work being too technical, the compliments from Marjorie that somehow shrank him at the same time. "Ethan is very capable," she used to say, "just not very warm." He had endured it because he loved his wife, because he believed marriage meant endurance, because he grew up believing family was something you held together until your hands hurt. Ethan set the milk down slowly. "So where do I sit?" he asked. Vanessa finally looked at him. Her eyes were sharp and hurried, not angry, but afraid of a discussion, afraid of listening. "You do not have to come," she said. I am just trying to avoid a scene. Avoid a scene. The words echoed like a slap. Do not embarrass this family, Vanessa added quickly. In that instant, Ethan understood he had been demoted from husband to liability, as if his very presence were a stain that needed to be hidden. Vanessa's phone buzzed on the couch. She grabbed it immediately. Ethan caught the name on the screen before she turned it face down. Marjorie. 2 seconds later, his own phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his mother-in-law. No greeting. Do not come. The seating is finalized. Ethan read it, then read it again. Seating like a guest list, like he was someone who could be edited out. Vanessa stared at the floor, looking like a child who knew something had broken and hoped not to be asked about it. Ethan felt tears rise, but forced them back. Crying now would only confirm what they already believed about him. He opened the refrigerator and placed the apple pie carefully on the shelf with more care than he realized he was capable of. Then he closed the door. Silence filled the kitchen. Vanessa said something behind him, but he barely heard it. In Ethan's mind, a cold, precise thought took shape. They thought he was just the peacemaker. They thought he did not see. They thought his power lay in his patience. And that assumption was exactly what would cost them everything. The message did more than tell him not to come. It confirmed that his absence had been calculated in advance. Ethan stood in the bedroom, yellow light spilling across the wooden floor, a cold sensation creeping from his ankles up into his chest. No one raised their voice. There was no argument. Everything unfolded neatly and politely, like an administrative decision already approved. Vanessa leaned against the doorway, with her arms crossed, wearing the tired expression of someone who believed she was doing the right thing, even while knowing deep down that it was wrong. He asked again very softly, as if raising his voice even slightly might cause everything to collapse. So where do I sit? Vanessa pressed her lips together. That was not the question she wanted to answer. She avoided his eyes and spoke quickly, saying he did not need to go, saying she only wanted to avoid a scene, saying that day was for her mother. The words slid smoothly from her mouth as if rehearsed. Ethan heard another message beneath them, cold and sharp. Do not disturb this order. Inside Vanessa's mind, everything followed a familiar logic. Family first. Harmony first. Appearances first. She did not think she was betraying anyone. She thought she was putting out a small fire before it spread. She did not see Ethan standing there, the man who had carried the household on his silence for years, the man who had stepped aside again and again so every meal could pass without tension. To Vanessa, he was only someone who noticed too much, someone who might accidentally expose the cracks her family had long learned to hide. Ethan saw it differently. He felt memories stacking on top of one another, growing heavier by the second. Sitting at his mother-in-law's table, back straight shoulders, tight smiling at the right moments, staying silent at the right ones. Comments that sounded harmless, but always placed him at the edge. His work was too dry. His personality too cold. Ethan is very solid, Marjorie often said, just not very warm. And everyone laughed as if it were an obvious truth. He had accepted it. Not because he believed they were right, but because he believed marriage required endurance. He had grown up in a family where men were taught that keeping the peace was a duty, that speaking too much was selfish. He swallowed every remark, every look, every uncomfortable pause, telling himself he was doing something noble. But tonight, when Vanessa said he did not have a seat, Ethan realized a line had been crossed, not between husband and wife, but between a human being and an object. He was no longer considered part of the family, but a variable to be removed. He pulled open the closet door. The sliding rail screeched through the quiet room. Vanessa flinched. She asked what he was doing, irritation and worry mixing in her voice. Ethan did not answer right away. He took out a small suitcase and set it on the bed. There was no rush, no shaking hands. Every movement was slow and deliberate, as if it had been weighed long before this moment. Vanessa followed him into the room, her footsteps sharp on the wooden floor. She said he was overreacting, that this was just a lunch, that he should not turn it into a war. Ethan let out a short, dry laugh without humor. He said calmly that a war was being erased from your place, and then being told it was for everyone's good. He packed a few shirts, a jacket, his laptop, his personal documents. Not the belongings of someone running away, but of someone withdrawing. Vanessa watched him, her heart beating faster. In that moment, she caught a glimpse of something she did not want to admit. Ethan was not angry. He was clear. And that clarity was more frightening than any outburst. She asked where he was going. Ethan said he needed somewhere he could breathe. When she reached for his hand, he stepped back, not roughly, just firmly enough to draw a boundary. In that instant, Vanessa felt herself losing something real, not just a quiet evening. Ethan passed through the living room and paused at the door. He looked at the space where he had once imagined a future holidays, the laughter of children who never existed. Vanessa stood behind him, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who believed she was being misunderstood. She called his name. Ethan turned just enough to look at her. She seemed about to say something, an apology, a vague promise. Instead, she said the line she always said. "Do not turn this into a war." Ethan looked at her. His eyes no longer hurt, only clear. He said he was not turning anything into a war. She had already turned his place into an empty chair. The door closed behind him. The sound was not loud, but it lingered. In the silent apartment, Vanessa stood alone for the first time, wondering whether she had protected her family, or whether she had just lost the only person who had always stood on her side. He did not sleep that night, not because of noise, but because of the overwhelming silence of a life that had just been separated from itself. The studio he rented smelled of cleaning solution and stale air, a neutral scent meant to offend no one and comfort no one either. Ethan set his suitcase down on the floor and stood there for a moment, listening. There were no footsteps from another room, no television murmuring through the walls, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, steady and indifferent, as if the world had not noticed that he had just stepped out of his own life. He sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the light. City glow filtered through the thin curtains, slicing the floor into cold patches of shadow and pale light. Outside, cars stopped at red lights. Someone laughed too loudly on the sidewalk. A delivery truck idled nearby. Those ordinary things suddenly felt cruel. They kept moving unchanged while he had been quietly removed from the place he once called home. Ethan thought he would be angry. He had braced himself for anger. But the feeling that came first was grief. Grief for the marriage he believed was solid. Grief for the version of himself he had been inside it. A man who stayed behind the scenes, constantly adjusting himself to fit into spaces shaped by other people. The kitchen scene replayed in his mind like a looped film. The carton of milk frozen in his hand. Vanessa's voice, light yet final. "You will not be sitting at the same table." As if the table were a privilege rather than a place earned by years of showing up. He showered longer than necessary, letting hot water pound against his back, hoping it would wash away the tightness in his chest. It did not. He changed into clean clothes and sat back on the bed, staring at his phone, as if the screen might explain something if he looked hard enough. Vanessa did not call. She sent a short message, every word carefully measured. "We should talk tomorrow. Please do not make this worse." Ethan read it and turned his phone face down. Worse, he thought. Worse than being told, "You do not belong." Sleep came in fragments. He woke before dawn, his heart racing, convinced he had forgotten something important. In a way, he had. He had forgotten how much of his life ran on trust. Quiet, unexamined trust. Trust that the person beside him would not turn his silence into a tool. Early in the morning, Ethan brewed coffee. Steam rose, the bitter scent pulling him back into the present. As he set the cup down on the counter, his phone vibrated. A short, clinical notification. Bank alert. A new device has accessed your account. Ethan frowned. He had not logged in anywhere new. His thumb opened the app on professional instinct, calm but decisive. The balance looked normal at first glance. No obvious withdrawals. For a moment he almost exhaled, almost told himself he was overreacting. Then he saw it. A pending authorization so small, most people would have ignored it. A test charge. The description meant nothing to him. Ethan did not ignore it. Not because he was paranoid, but because years in operations had taught him that real trouble rarely begins loudly. It begins small, reasonable, easy to dismiss. He opened the security section, the login history. One unfamiliar device. Approved. The timestamp triggered his memory instantly. At that exact moment, he had been sitting in a conference room, headphones on, arguing with a supplier about deadlines. He remembered clearly because that meeting had run longer than expected. Ethan lowered himself into a chair, the coffee growing cold in front of him. Scattered memories began to connect on their own. Marjorie sitting in their living room the week before, holding his phone with carefully manicured fingers, as if it were fragile. "Your banking app is so modern," she had said. "I do not understand it." Vanessa had laughed softly. "Help my mom. You are good at this." He had helped. He remembered standing beside them, pointing at the screen, approving something without a second thought. Because why would he question it? Because family. Because trust. Ethan closed his eyes and exhaled slowly through his nose. When he opened them, the fog of a wounded man was gone. In its place was the cold focus of someone who had just seen the structure behind the curtain. They thought he was only the peacemaker. They thought he did not check. They thought his silence was a safe gap. And in that cramped studio, Ethan understood that he had not been removed from the table to keep the peace. He had been removed so he would not see what they were doing. He picked up his phone again, this time not to look for an explanation, but to begin documenting the truth. The phone kept ringing as if someone were trying to pull him back before everything slipped out of control. Ethan watched the screen light up and go dark again and again, and for the first time in years, he did not rush to put out the fire. He chose to meet Vanessa at a crowded cafe near his office, not because he still hoped, but because he understood how easily the truth could be bent when there were only two people and too many unnamed emotions. In a place filled with the hiss of espresso machines, the clink of spoons against cups, and overlapping conversations, no one could raise their voice. No one could cry their way into leverage. There, the truth had to be spoken quietly, but directly. Vanessa was already seated when Ethan arrived. She wrapped both hands around a paper cup that had long gone cold, her eyes fixed on the glass door, as if she were searching for an exit. She looked smaller in that space, worn down, stripped of the confidence she carried so easily around her family. When she saw Ethan, she stood abruptly caught between wanting to hug him and wanting to apologize. He gave her the chance to do neither. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You said you wanted to talk?" Ethan said, his voice so steady it made Vanessa pause. She nodded and swallowed. "I did not think it would go this far." "No one ever does," Ethan replied. "It always goes farther than you expect." The noise of the cafe filled the silence between them. Vanessa rubbed her palms together, a nervous habit. "My mother is terrified," she said at last. "She thinks she is being investigated." "She is being reviewed," Ethan said. Vanessa flinched. "You did not have to do this." "I did," Ethan interrupted softly. "I am protecting my identity. There is a difference." Vanessa lowered her gaze. "Tracy said it was only temporary," she said. "Just to help my mom get through a rough patch. A bridge." "Using my name," Ethan said. "My access. My credit." Vanessa pressed her lips together. You have always been good at this. You always fix things. The words slipped out naturally, and Ethan realized how deep the assumption ran. The quiet entitlement to use his stability as a shared resource. Why did you take my seat at the table? Ethan asked. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. Sunday. Because I did not want tension. No, Ethan said. Because you knew I would see through it. Vanessa stayed silent too long, then exhaled. Because you always ask why. You connect the dots. Tracy said if you were there, everything would slow down. So the solution was to erase me, Ethan said evenly. To make me uninvolved. It was not like that, Vanessa said quickly. We just needed you distracted. Not involved, Ethan repeated, almost smiling. He took out his phone and placed it between them. The screen lit up. I spoke to the bank. There was an unfamiliar device approved from a location that was not mine, at a time I can prove I was elsewhere. I froze my credit, logged every access, opened a review. Vanessa's face drained of color. I did not think you would do this. I did not think I would have to, Ethan said. But here we are. Vanessa leaned forward. If this goes any further, my mother will be ruined. Ethan looked at her closely without anger. I am not ruining anyone. I am refusing to be collateral. She reached across the table, her fingers stopping in midair. Ethan pulled back before she could touch him. She withdrew her hand as if burned. I never meant to hurt you, she said. I just did not know how to stop her. That is the problem, Ethan said. You did not try. Vanessa's phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at it and stiffened. My mother, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Answer it. Here. Vanessa put the call on speaker, her hands shaking. Marjorie's voice came through sharp and controlled. This has gone far enough. I disagree, Ethan said calmly. It has just begun. She accused him of being dramatic and said, family helps each other. Ethan replied that family does not hide things and does not decide who sits at the table based on convenience. Another female voice cut in, younger, more confident. Tell him to calm down, she said. It was just a test. He would not even notice. Vanessa gasped and said Tracy's name. The line went silent, a beat later. Ethan looked out the window at a man walking his dog, the morning unfolding with cruel normality. He had heard enough. And in that moment, Vanessa understood what she had avoided for too long. Ethan was no longer the man who fixed the aftermath. He was the man who ended it. He stood up and slung his bag over his shoulder. You are tearing the family apart, Vanessa said, real tears falling now. No, Ethan replied. You did that when you decided I was an embarrassment instead of a husband. He walked out of the cafe, the noise swallowing the space he left behind. And for the first time since that night in the kitchen, Ethan was not walking with pain, but with readiness. Everything did not explode the way they expected. It became orderly, in a way that was frightening. After the meeting at the cafe, Ethan disappeared from their emotional orbit. No arguments, no further explanations, not a single unnecessary message. His silence was no longer endurance, it was deliberate distance. And that frightened Vanessa more than any threat ever could. In the small studio, Ethan sat at the desk under harsh white light, washing over bare walls. His laptop was open. A new folder appeared on the screen. He named it simply, Proof. Not for revenge, not to humiliate anyone, but so the truth could not be twisted once emotions began speaking louder than facts. He worked the way he always truly had. Calm, methodical, precise. He saved screenshots of bank alerts, logged access times, cross-checked them against his work calendar, marked every small detail, every moment that once seemed insignificant. Because he understood something most people did not. Real power does not come from who speaks the loudest, but from who understands the structure underneath everything. Elsewhere, Vanessa moved at a completely different pace. Her phone would not stop vibrating. calls from her mother, from relatives, questions layered with panic, anger, and fear. Marjorie began to feel something slipping out of her control. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. This time, Ethan was not coming back to smooth things over. Vanessa texted him, "Please talk to me. My mother is not well." Ethan read the message, then placed his phone face down. Not because he wanted to punish her, but because he knew the pattern too well. Emotion first, urgency second, accountability never. The days that followed passed in a strange stillness. Ethan went to work, attended meetings, answered emails, nodded at the right moments. No one at the office noticed anything had changed, but inside him every step was placed more carefully. He was no longer moving on instinct. He was choosing. Each night he reopened the proof folder, not to torment himself, but to remind himself that what had happened was real, that he had not imagined being removed from the table, that his silence had once been used as a tool. Sunday arrived quietly. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the studio, laying a pale glow across the floor. Somewhere in the city, a long table was being set. Napkins folded neatly, seats assigned. Ethan's absence had already been accounted for in the arrangement. He brewed coffee and stood by the window watching a woman walk her dog past the building. Life continued steady and indifferent. He wondered what Vanessa was doing, whether she was thinking of him or busy managing the atmosphere in her mother's house. He wondered how many people there knew that it was his name they had tried to use in the shadows. Near midday, Ethan's phone rang. Vanessa. He stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Her voice broke on the first word. "There are people here," she said quickly. "My mother is asking questions." The bank called again. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. What kind of questions, he asked evenly. Vanessa said her mother wanted to know why everything was blocked, why nothing was working anymore, what he had done. "I did not do anything," Ethan replied. "I stopped something." Vanessa said Tracy was there. The name surfaced again, calm and confident like a familiar key. Tracy said she needed to explain a few things to everyone. About the money, about the misunderstandings. "Misunderstandings do not require hiding," Ethan said. Vanessa started crying. Real crying. "They are looking at me like I lost control," she said. Control. The word made Ethan pause. She did not say trust. She did not say truth. She said control. He leaned against the counter, the same place he had stood when the first bank alert arrived days earlier. "What happens next?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at the sunlight on the floor dust floating quietly in the air. "What happens next?" he said slowly, "depends on whether anyone there is willing to tell the truth." The silence on the other end answered everything. Ethan understood that from this moment on, he was no longer outside the situation. Not because he returned to the table, but because his absence had become impossible to ignore. And for the first time since that night in the kitchen, he knew one thing for certain. He did not need to raise his voice to hold power. He only needed to stop bowing his head. The family lunch began to collapse, even though he was not there. There was no shouting, no breaking dishes, only glances shifting at the same time. Sunday unfolded in a rigid, strained order. In Marjorie's house, the familiar smell of food filled the air. The long dining table was set with careful precision. Napkins folded neatly, seats assigned as if following a printed diagram. Vanessa sat in her designated place, back straight, her smile held together by effort. Her eyes kept drifting toward the empty chair where Ethan used to sit, then quickly turning away as if afraid of her own gaze. Marjorie spoke more than usual. Her voice was loud and confident, trying to keep the rhythm of the room intact. She asked questions, made jokes, told old stories. But beneath that surface unease showed itself in the slightly longer pauses, in the way she checked her phone too often. She knew something was wrong. She just did not yet know how fast it was coming. Tracy appeared with confident steps and a professional smile. She lingered near the kitchen counter, instead of sitting down right away, as if surveying a familiar stage. She said she had only stopped by to explain a few things to reassure Marjorie and everyone else. Her tone was light and smooth enough to calm enough to steer the narrative. Vanessa felt the shift immediately. She noticed relatives' eyes flick toward her searching. She heard low murmurs. She understood that in this scene, she was no longer the peacemaker. She was the one under suspicion. Near midday, Marjorie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. One call, then another. She stood up, walked into the hallway, and closed the door. When she returned, her complexion had changed. No one asked, but everyone knew. The order she had worked so hard to maintain was starting to tremble. Vanessa stood and excused herself to the kitchen, her hands shaking enough to spill a spoon. Tracy followed, lowering her voice, saying nothing was serious, saying banks overreact, saying everything would be fine if everyone stayed calm. Vanessa listened, but she no longer fully believed it. She remembered Ethan's voice in the cafe, not raised, not pleading, just clear. Vanessa's phone vibrated. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. She stared at it for a few seconds, then answered and stepped outside. Her voice broke immediately. "My mother is asking questions." The bank called again. "Tracy is here. Everyone is looking at me like I ruined everything." Ethan listened, leaning against the counter in his studio, the same spot where he had stood when the first alert arrived. He asked what they were asking. Vanessa said her mother wanted to know why everything was blocked, why nothing could move anymore. Ethan replied that he had not done anything, he had simply stopped something. Vanessa said Tracy needed to explain a few misunderstandings about the money. Ethan said misunderstandings do not require secrecy. Vanessa began to cry for real tears she could not control. "They are looking at me like I lost control," she said. Control. The word hung between them. Not trust, not truth. Control. Ethan was silent for a few beats. Then he asked a question that caught in Vanessa's throat. "Is anyone there telling the truth?" Vanessa did not answer right away. The silence stretched. Through the line, Ethan heard the faint clink of dishes, the forced laughter trying to restart the meal. He understood. No one was speaking up. Inside the house, Tracy stepped into the yard, her voice still calm, saying that if this was not handled quickly, things would get worse. Marjorie listened, her lips pressed tight. For the first time, she felt she no longer controlled the story. For the first time, she did not know what to say to end it. Vanessa's phone vibrated again. This time it was a message, a new bank alert. Another attempt had been blocked. She stared at the words, then looked up at Tracy. Her expression changed. No more avoidance. No more submission. Vanessa walked back to the table. Her voice trembled, but it was not quiet. "There is something everyone needs to know," she said. The table fell completely silent. Marjorie said her name like a warning. Tracy stepped forward and placed a hand on the back of Vanessa's chair, trying to pull her down. Vanessa did not sit. For the first time, she did not comply. On the other end of the line, Ethan heard everything through Vanessa's unsteady breathing. He did not speak. He did not need to. He knew that from this moment on, his absence had become the center of that room. The lunch continued, but no one ate. The empty chair was no longer just a missing seat. It was a quiet accusation. And while everyone struggled to maintain appearances, a truth had already taken root. It was not Ethan who had been removed from the table. It was the table itself that was beginning to crack. The message came from an unknown number, short and cold. "If you do not come, this will get worse." Ethan read the words in the quiet studio, afternoon light sliding slowly across the floor. He did not need to guess who sent it. The tone was familiar, half threat, half false concern. as if the sender were trying to save him from a disaster they themselves had created. For a moment, Ethan stood up, took a few steps, then stopped. Not out of fear, but because he understood this was the turn they believed he would avoid. He had not planned to go to that lunch, at least not the way they expected. No speech, no anger, no dramatic pounding on the table. That morning he had done something else. He organized files, documents placed in precise order, timestamps, alerts, confirmations. Everything clean, unemotional. He replied to 2 emails from his lawyer, then walked around the block. He paused to watch a father teaching his daughter how to ride a bike, his hand hovering just behind the seat, ready to catch her if she fell. The image stayed with him longer than he expected. The phone kept vibrating. Vanessa called. Then Marjorie called. Ethan did not answer. Then another message appeared from the same unknown number. Tracy, if you do not come, this will spiral out of control. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. Then he picked up his bag and slipped a thin folder inside. No labels, no colors. Just paper. Just facts. He was not going to ask for a seat. He was going because his name was already there. Marjorie's house looked the same as always. Neatly trimmed hedges, 2 cars in the driveway, soft music drifting from the backyard. The smell of grilled meat hung in the air, familiar enough to almost make him turn back. Habit is powerful. But this time, Ethan walked through the gate. Conversations stopped one by one. First Vanessa's sister, then an uncle, then Vanessa herself, frozen mid-step, color draining from her face. She said his name softly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa asked. Ethan answered simply that he was there because his name was. The words rippled through the group. Marjorie appeared from the back door, apron tied tight, her smile snapping into place too quickly. "You came," she said, surprise and irritation tangled together. Ethan replied that she had said the seating was finalized. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The long table was set, place cards folded neatly. Ethan scanned them without touching anything. There was no card for him. He did not point it out. Instead, he placed the thin folder in the center of the table. The sound it made was small. The effect was not. Tracy stood near the grill, a wine glass in her hand. Her confidence wavered only when their eyes met. She asked what it was. Ethan said it was documentation of everything done in his name. Vanessa stepped closer, whispering for him to stop. Ethan looked at her not with accusation, only sadness. "This is not a scene," he said. "This is clarity." Tracy gave a thin smile and said it was just a temporary financial adjustment. Ethan replied that nothing is temporary without consent. Marjorie snapped that this was family business. Ethan said no, this was identity use. The air locked tight. Someone asked what was going on. Ethan opened the folder and pulled out the first page. A bank notice. Then another. Timestamps. Access confirmations. Vanessa stared at the papers, tears spilling over. "Mom," she whispered. "What did you do?" Marjorie's hands shook. She said she did what she had to do for the family. Ethan asked for whom. Tracy cut in, saying everything could go away if he just unfroze the account. Ethan turned to her, his voice even. "You do not get to fix what you broke." Marjorie's phone rang. She answered and her face drained of color. She did not say who it was. Ethan knew. The thing they feared most had arrived. He gathered the folder and slid it back into his bag. "From now on," he said, "everything goes through my lawyer." He turned to Vanessa. "I loved you. But love does not survive when respect is rationed." Ethan turned and walked toward the gate. No one stopped him. Behind him, the table remained set, the food untouched, one seat unfilled. As he reached the sidewalk, his phone vibrated. Another alert. Another attempt blocked. Ethan did not slow down. This time he was not leaving the table. He was leaving the game. The truth did not arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived through paperwork, through emails, through phone calls that could no longer be avoided. The morning after the shattered gathering, Ethan woke very early. No alarm, no jolt. His body had simply learned to be alert before the world rebuilt its usual disguise. Pale light slipped through the studio window and fell across the table where the folder had rested the day before. It was no longer there, but its echo remained clear and impossible to take back. His phone vibrated while he was making coffee. An email from the bank. Short, polite, precise. They confirmed the case had been transferred to compliance. All further communication would go through official channels. Ethan read slowly, line by line. No triumph, no relief. Just the sensation of a door closing firmly behind him, locked tight. Across the city, Marjorie sat in her living room, clutching her phone as if it might steady her. She had barely slept. Every sound in the house made her flinch. The refrigerator hum, the wind her own footsteps. She had been used to controlling the rhythm of that home, used to the way a single sentence from her could silence a room. Now silence returned and swallowed her whole. Vanessa sat at the edge of her mother's bed, shoulders slumped. She was no longer crying. The tears had run dry the night before. What remained was a hollow awareness, as if she had woken in a strange room where all familiar choices had vanished. She remembered Ethan's eyes when he said everything would go through his lawyer. No anger, no retaliation, just an ending. Marjorie's phone rang again. This time she answered immediately. The voice on the other end was calm, neither raised nor threatening. It asked for confirmation. It asked for timelines. It asked about consent. Each question was a small needle puncturing the confidence she had worn for years. When the call ended, Marjorie set the phone down, her hands no longer able to hide their shaking. Tracy did not appear that morning. No messages, no calls. The house felt different without her smooth presence, the one that had made everything seem manageable. Her absence spoke louder than any explanation. Vanessa stared at her own phone, a message to Ethan still unsent on the screen. I understand now. She did not send it. Understanding had come too late. In the studio, Ethan opened his laptop. He did not search for more evidence. There was enough. Instead, he began to reorganize his life piece by piece, changing passwords, confirming details, logging calls, not out of fear, but out of respect for himself. He realized how long he had allowed people to cross his boundaries simply because he did not want to make anyone uncomfortable. Around midday, his phone rang. Vanessa. He stared at her name for a long moment before answering. Her voice sounded rough, exhausted. My mother is panicking, she said. Tracy is gone. They are asking so many questions. Ethan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not comfort. When she fell silent, he spoke. This is no longer a family matter. Vanessa exhaled as if finally admitting it aloud. I know. A pause stretched between them. No blame, no pleading. Just the bare truth standing in the space they shared. Vanessa asked what he would do next. Ethan looked out the window at sunlight reflecting off distant glass buildings. He said he would continue protecting his name. Everything else he would let the system handle. The call ended quietly, but heavily. Vanessa set her phone down, realizing for the first time in her life that she could not use emotion to steer the outcome. She had traded too much for the illusion of peace, and the cost was now unmistakable. Later that afternoon, another email arrived for Ethan. Brief. Another access attempt had been blocked. The case had been escalated. He read it, then closed the laptop. There was nothing more to do that day. Nothing left to prove. Ethan sat back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. Not to rest, but to fully feel the moment. He had been underestimated, removed from the table, and that removal had forced him to step out of a role that no longer belonged to him. The truth had been exposed, quietly, without mercy, and for the first time in a very long while, Ethan knew with certainty that he no longer needed permission to exist. He did not step into a war, he stepped into a process. The lawyer's office sat high in a glass building, where morning light reflected into cold shards across the floor. Ethan sat upright at a pale wooden table, his hands resting calmly on freshly printed documents. There were no emotional bandages here, no empty reassurance, only precision. His lawyer did not waste time. He slid a printed page across the desk, his voice steady. They tried again. The bank blocked it. The case has been escalated. This is no longer informal. Ethan nodded. He already knew. His body recognized the shift before his mind did. Once things moved into systems, emotion lost its leverage. The lawyer asked what Ethan wanted next. The question was simple, but heavy. Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked through the glass wall at the city moving in its steady rhythm. He thought of the dark kitchen that night, the empty chair, the way he had been asked to shrink so others could feel comfortable. Then he spoke clearly. "I want to protect my name. Everything else comes after." The lawyer nodded, as if that was the answer he had been waiting for. They moved through each step, layer by layer. An affidavit, written demands to terminate all access, complete separation of financial authority, formal notices ensuring that any action tied to Ethan's name would require his presence. No gaps, no gray areas. While they worked, Ethan's phone vibrated softly on the desk. Vanessa. He did not answer, not out of coldness, but because he had chosen a new order of priorities. His new structure did not begin with extinguishing fires for others. By midday, the paperwork was signed. The ink was fresh. His name was clear and steady. As Ethan left the office, he felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, but cleanliness. The feeling of a room finally emptied after years of holding things that did not belong to him. Later that afternoon, the receptionist called. There was a woman asking to see him. She said it was urgent. Ethan knew before the door opened. Vanessa stood near the window, her shoulders slumped, her bag clenched tightly in her hand. There was no preparation, no makeup to conceal anything. Only real exhaustion. She spoke immediately. They signed. My mother signed the statement. She admitted she used your authorization without telling you. Ethan took a slow breath. Something in his chest loosened. Not relief, but closure. He asked about Tracy. Vanessa looked down. The bank opened a separate investigation. She disappeared. Changed numbers. Left town, maybe. Ethan nodded. That fit. Vanessa said she told them everything. She did not protect anyone. She apologized for Sunday for all of it. Ethan looked at her longer than necessary. He believed she was sorry. He also knew that regret does not rewind choices. She whispered that she should have chosen him. Ethan replied gently without bitterness. You chose comfort. That is not the same as love. Vanessa closed her eyes and nodded. She did not argue. She handed him an envelope, copies of everything the lawyer requested. Their fingers did not touch. Ethan thanked her. It was not a thank you tied to obligation, just courtesy. Vanessa asked quietly if they could still fix things. The question hung fragile and heavy. Ethan thought of how many times he had made himself smaller to keep the peace, how easily he had been removed from the table so others could operate. He answered slowly. He wanted to live in a house where his presence was not negotiable, and he did not believe she could offer that. Vanessa nodded, tears filling her eyes without falling. She turned and walked out without looking back. Ethan stood still for a moment, listening to the door close softly. That evening he returned to the studio. He opened the window and let cold air spill in. The city below remained loud and indifferent. Ethan stood there feeling a new truth settle into place. His power had never been about controlling others. It had always been about the ability to leave spaces that no longer respected him, and from that moment on, the road ahead no longer required permission from anyone. He slept better that night, not deeply, not for long, but without the familiar tight knot in his chest. For the first time in weeks, his body was not bracing for the next impact. Morning arrived gently. No buzzing phone, no urgent messages, no voice asking him to fix something. Ethan woke before the alarm lay still for a moment, listening to the silence. This silence was different. It did not press down on him. It did not accuse him. It simply existed, neutral and honest. He made coffee and leaned against the studio window ledge. Early sunlight spilled in, touching the bare wall. No family photos, no crowded calendar, no traces of quiet compromises. A small space, but one that did not demand he shrink to fit. Across the city, Vanessa sat alone in the old apartment. The empty spaces there felt sharper than ever. Every object carried a memory, but memory was no longer enough to soften the truth. She remembered how Ethan used to wake early, quietly preparing everything so he would not disturb anyone. She had taken that for granted. Now she could not. Marjorie closed the door to her study for the first time in years. No visitors, no calls, no instructions. The walls that once reflected authority now held only the heavy sound of her own breathing. She began to see that the control she called protecting the family had only existed because someone was willing to stand still for her to lean on. Ethan went outside and walked without a destination. He passed familiar streets, yet it felt like a different city. Everything looked the same, but he had changed. Before he always walked quickly, as if afraid that if he slowed down, someone would need him. Today he walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because he was no longer running. He stopped in front of a small cafe, where he and Vanessa had once sat for hours, talking about plans always postponed for the sake of family. He did not go in. He stood there briefly, then kept walking. Some places do not need revisiting to be closed. His phone vibrated. A notification from the bank. Final confirmation. No further access attempts. His name was clear. The case secured. Ethan read the words, did not smile, but felt solid ground beneath his feet. No one could pull him past the boundary he had drawn. As evening fell, he returned to the studio. This time he opened the suitcase that had sat in the corner since the day he left. He unpacked slowly, without urgency, without regret. He placed each item where it belonged, not to recreate an old life, but to begin one that required no explanation. That night he sent a short email to his lawyer, confirming everything was complete, then closed the laptop. There was nothing more to do that day. No one left to rescue, no situation demanding further sacrifice. Ethan sat on the bed, his back against the wall. He thought of the dining table that day, the empty chair. The moment he realized his silence had been used as a tool, and he understood something deeper. He had not lost his seat. He had refused a role. Somewhere else, Vanessa stared at her phone, rereading his old messages lines that always ended in concession. She finally understood that love does not disappear because of an investigation or a lawyer. It disappears when respect becomes negotiable. Night settled in. The city lights came on. Ethan lay down and closed his eyes. No more tension. No more guessing who would need him to fix something tomorrow. He did not know exactly what the future would look like, but for the first time, he knew one thing with certainty. He was no longer living as someone underestimated. He was living in alignment with his true worth. He returned to the old apartment one last time, without warning, without carrying anger, only a decision that had fully formed. That morning, the sky was softly gray. No rain, no sun. Ethan stood before the familiar door, the key cold in his hand. When it opened, the smell of the old space rushed out, a mix of memories once called family and truths no longer avoided. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him without hesitation. The apartment was silent. No Vanessa, no ringing phone, no requests waiting to be answered. Ethan began gathering what remained of his things slowly and decisively. Books from the shelves, clothes from the closet, small items once kept because he believed he would need them someday. He realized many things had been kept only out of fear of admitting that everything had already changed. In the kitchen, he paused at the exact spot where he had once stood, with a grocery bag in his hand, when he first heard the words about the dining table. The memory was no longer sharp, like a cut, only clear. Clear enough that self-deception was impossible. Ethan understood that moment had not been the beginning of the collapse, but the end of a role he had played for far too long. He wrote a short note. No accusations, no blame, just truth undecorated. He had believed family was a place without conditions, but what he was given were conditions imposed in silence, and he chose himself. He placed the note on the kitchen counter, left the keys beside it, and walked away. Outside, the city continued as usual. Pedestrians hurried past, cars stretched into long lines. No one knew that on an upper floor of an aging building, a life had just been released from invisible restraints. Ethan walked on this time without luggage. He carried the lightness of someone who had returned what never belonged to him. Somewhere else, Vanessa read the note for a long time. She did not cry immediately. She did not get angry. She sat down and for the first time faced the full weight of the consequences of choices once called compromise. She understood Ethan did not leave because of the bank, not because of her mother, not because of Tracy. He left because he was no longer seen as an equal. In her large house, Marjorie realized a truth that came too late. The power she believed she held had only existed as long as someone else remained silent. When that silence disappeared, every structure she built began to tremble. No one raised their voice, no one confronted her, yet everything had already shifted. Time passed without spectacle. Ethan began a different rhythm of life, smaller, quieter, but his. His name was clean. His accounts were secure. More importantly, his boundaries were no longer crossed. He no longer had to prove his worth through sacrifice. One evening, he stood by the studio window, watching city lights stretch into the distance. He thought of the dining table of the empty chair that once made him doubt himself. Now he understood. Not every table is worth sitting at. Not every place called family allows you to be yourself. Ethan's story did not end with a loud victory. It ended with a quiet choice that could not be undone. He did not become someone else. He simply returned to who he truly was, unshrunk, unobscured. If you have ever been pushed aside, made to believe your presence was replaceable, remember this. Your value is not measured by how well you stay silent. It is measured by your courage to stand up when respect disappears. If this story made you reflect, leave a comment and share how you felt and where you are watching from. If you want to keep listening to stories about awakening boundaries and self-respect, please like and subscribe. Sometimes it is the quietest stories that remind us we are not alone on our path.